Good morning. Welcome to our fourth and final LiterARTure conversation for the season. We're going to tackle two prominent, bold influencers who break the mold in art and literature, Winslow Homer and Mark Twain. As always, we have over-prepared. And we have a great deal to say. We have a lot to cover today. I'm Cindy Edelman.
And I'm Stacey Goldring.
And for those of you who are new to us, LiterARTure is a branch of Searching for Identity, Stacey's nonprofit where she teaches writing workshops to second and third generation children of Holocaust survivors. And not only that, she's made an award-winning documentary film called Traces, and where she took the stories of the second gen and turned them into a documentary film that's been shown all over the world. And many of you have generously supported Searching for Identity, and we thank you for that. And I could say a lot more, but as always, she censored me. And so...
That is not true.
Yes, it is.
It's a little bit true.
A little true. No comment.
Tiny, tiny, tiny.
Okay. And there's a book in our future, and please stay tuned for that. As many of you also know, our partnership began at the Starbucks in San Marco.
But I'm a Dunkin' girl, just saying.
Thanks to my dear sister-in-law, Susan Edelman, who introduced us in the fall of 2017 after
It's all your fault, Susan. It's all your fault.
After trying to determine how to close the polarization or lack of civil discourse, the gap in our community, and we knew we had to do something. We started working in multiple locations, but none as fine as the one we're in right this minute. Thanks to Stephanie and Tim Cost, we moved into this gorgeous space on the JU campus in 2024. And to this day, we still pinch ourselves.
We refer to it as our Taj Mahal.
Additionally, our endless gratitude, and that is no overstatement, goes to the ever-generous Julia and John Taylor, who have underwritten our labor of love for the past 3 years. There are no words to describe the depth of our thankfulness to you. All the proceeds from LiterARTure are poured back into Searching for Identity, which is why our time together matters so much. So we're at the final LiterARTure of the season, and you're in for a real treat to spend time with good old Winslow Homer and Mark Twain. To us, they're among the stars in the American firmament. Twain was born in 1835, but he was just 3 months older than Homer, and they both, as you can see on the screen, they both passed away in 1910, but they never met. They were undoubtedly aware of one another because they shared many similarities, including their distinctly American voices. They both were great storytellers. They both were popular during their lifetimes, and they addressed some of the same themes of nostalgia, of love of childhood, and innocence. Themes, and they both fixated on the relationship between man and nature. They advanced realism in their respective disciplines, which meant that they moved away from European academic traditions. For instance, when Homer was painting some of his seascapes, Impressionism was thriving in France, and he actually went to France, and it just didn't ring true for him doing Impressionism. But anyway, each lived through the Civil War and experienced an America that was quickly changing after that horrific event. Some of his paintings and some of his watercolors were used as the illustrations for Mark Twain's books, including The Innocents Abroad, the book that Stacey's going to talk about today. Okay, keep going. And then here's just an example of some of the short stories by Twain and Tom Sawyer that were illustrated by Homer. All right, next. Okay, as a born and bred Northerner, Homer was a prickly fella. He was taciturn, meaning he was reserved, to the point of not wanting to be disturbed. He was intensely private. So private, in fact, that he posted a sign on his door to his Prouts Neck, Maine studio that said, snakes, and mice to keep away any unwanted visitors or neighbors.
That could actually apply to where my office is, don't you think?
That's true. If anyone's ever seen your
Yesterday I was
office.
fighting a raccoon. It's a long story, right, Lisa? I won.
Yeah. Homer actually had a Medusa door knocker. And when I told Stacey that, she goes, I wish I had one. Okay, Stacey. And his 4 favorite words, and I swear I'm not making this up, are mind your own business. And as the oldest of 3 daughters, my mother used to say that to me and my sisters all the time, mind your own business. Okay. And this, by the way, is what his backyard looked like. Proudsneck, Maine is it's south, is a community, small community south of Portland. So this is what the beach looks like up in Maine. It's very rocky, and you can see here where he would have been inspired, greatly inspired for his seascapes that he painted. But then he also, go to the next. Oh yes, Stacey had to put the picture of us, at the National Gallery a few years ago where we encountered a Homer exhibition. He also painted exquisite watercolors. In fact, Winslow Homer is the artist who is credited with elevating watercolor art to a high art on the same plane as painting and sculpture. So what is it about the Boston-born, ruggedly independent Homer that makes him the quintessential American painter? Was it the masterful way his paintings told stories, or was it his historical, political, and social references in his works that make them particularly relevant to this very day, or his devotion to realism in particular the physicality of his figures? They're just so beautifully rendered and with the reality and tone. Or was his emphasis on the truth, on showing the truth, or his brilliance as a watercolorist? He even said this, quote, "You will see in the future, I will live by my watercolors." And I have a few watercolor examples to show you. We're not going to dwell on them. One shows you, it's called The Rest, where he spent a great deal of time in the Bahamas. By the way, you wouldn't want to be in Proudsneck, Maine in late fall or the winter at all. So he would get on, a train at the time and head south and stopped in Jacksonville. Go to the next, if you would. This watercolor is at the Comer Museum of Art and Gardens here in our own hometown. The white rowboat on the St. Johns River. In fact, there are several watercolors that he made here on the St. Johns. And then, of course, he loved the out of doors. He belonged to a sportsman's club in the Adirondacks. And this is one of Stacey's favorite Winslow Homer paintings, where a young man has shot a buck, and the buck is in the water, and his dog is in the water too, and there's a conundrum going on, right? Like, what's gonna happen if the dog and the buck are in the boat? We know what's gonna happen, it's gonna tip over. So anyway, but that's another part of Homer that's so exhilarating, is the ambiguity. He leaves a lot to our imagination. We can all construct a story, and I mean, if we let Stacey loose on this, who knows what the story would be.
But I like it because, like a good book, a writer doesn't tell you, he shows you. And that's what Homer is doing here. He is showing us, but it's up to us because we have a brain. So I imagine that his cell phone's going off right now in his back pocket, and his mother's going, "Where are you?"
Growing up in Boston with a mother who was a talented amateur watercolorist and a father who owned a hardware store but had other business dealings, we'll call him a businessman, Homer never trained to be an artist. In the 1850s, there was no art school in Boston. There was one art school in America at the time. It was in Philadelphia. And there were not very many exhibits in Boston, nor were there number of artists. Instead, Homer apprenticed for a couple of years with a commercial lithographer, and he freelanced for different publications, which led to a job offer New York from Harper's Weekly, which is described as the most well-known periodical of the day. Yes. Homer moved to New York City in 1859, and in the fall of 1861, Harper sent Homer to the front lines in Virginia, where he was embedded with the Army of the Potomac. Imagine that. I mean, he was a frontline artist, and in those days, the way things worked for artists, he would sketch the soldiers in all different kinds of activities. He would mail the sketches back to New York City, where engravers would turn them into illustrations for the magazine. And that's how he became well known. And that's also when he started painting in oil. So I want to just show you one of his wood engravings made for Harper's, which is on the screen here. And it's called The Army of the Potomac, a Sharpshooter on Duty, 1862. Can you make out his face? Well, me neither. It's barely there. The sharpshooter takes aim at another sharpshooter, and it kind of reminded me of Ice Agents. You know, you can't see his face very well. And from this site online, historymaking.org.com, during the Civil War, and this figure in the engraving is a typical picket. He was called a picket, not picket like Pickett's Charge, but a picket. And the pickets were meant to be defensive observers of what was going on. And so this sharpshooter in Homer is actively hunting an unseen enemy from a pine tree. And notice his pose. He's perched precariously on a high branch. His rear end is draped over the limb. His foot is tucked into the hollow of the tree. His right arm holds the lethal weapon, and his left arm on a branch, kind of steadying himself. How clever of Homer to use the canteen as a counterbalance. The Met, and that would be the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Met tells us that the sharpshooter totes the most recent technological rifle, which had a longer scope, allowing for more precision from a distance. Homer actually saw a real sharpshooter at Yorktown who had his sights on another human being. And his response, Homer, said this about the sniper's professional activities, which is really telling, quote, "It struck me as being as near murder as anything I could ever think of," end quote. According to writer and critic Robert Hughes, and Stacey loves him because he's Australian, as a result of his illustrations, the war became Homer's school, and more than any other experience was it instrumental in determining what kind of artist Homer would be. A year later, he went on to paint, please, the subject itself in oil. And this is the first oil based on an illustrated subject that Homer made. And it's in the Portland Museum of Art in Portland, Maine. Now, this slide is called Prisoners from the Front. This painting is Prisoners from the Front. Thank you. It's the painting that most contemporary critics thought was his best painting from the war. And it's dated 1866 at the Met, which certainly went a long way in establishing his reputation. For one thing, it showed the depth of his understanding of the war and its significance. What's going on? Well, you see 3 ragtag Confederate soldiers have laid down their arms after being captured, and they're in a staring contest with a Union officer, the hunk of burning love, Captain Franz Channing Barlow. I think he's pretty cute. Whose soldiers, my husband's not here today, I can say that. Whose soldiers, but his brother is, so I better be careful. Whose soldiers had captured a division of the Confederate Army and 2 generals at Spotsylvania, Virginia in 1864. Barlow, you see on the far right, crisply attired, sword hanging off his waist, he of the movie star looks, stands heroically in charge. According to the Met, Winslow Homer portrays him as a hard, firm-faced, principled, dignified, in-profile soldier. He makes a strong contrast with the tattered, broken down, stone-faced Confederate trio. And Homer had visited Captain Barlow at the front twice during the war, and they actually became friends. He typecasted the Confederate prisoners against the charming Barlow, whereas Barlow, as said, was dignified. The Confederates looked kind of raggedy, tattered, restless, hungry. With the principled Barlow, you see the impudent expression on a couple of the faces of the Confederate prisoners. And of course, differences in the cultured Barlow versus the typecasted Confederate. I mean, they weren't typecasted, they were cast in a different cast. Is there any doubt where the artist's sympathies lie? Well, let's turn our attention to our other shining star, Mark Twain. Please spill the beans.
Oh, I shall. You're gonna do it? Oh boy, she's gonna do it. Okay. Buckle up. No, I didn't say anything. Okay. After the upheaval of the Civil War, living in America must have felt like cleaning up after a major hurricane beyond our worst imagination. Rebuilding life after that took great strength. Can anyone here trace their American family roots back to the period of the 1860s here in the U.S.? Sure. Wow. Okay, that's one. So, Christy, how far back can you go?
My Castle relatives came from Ireland, the Isle of Skye in the 1760s.
Oh my gosh.
And settled in South Carolina. They knew somebody who would actually be at that time. My redneck relatives
Yeah. I love it. That's great. The McCaskill clan. That's amazing.
And then the other side was the Pascals.
The Pascals and the McCaskill. Well, you rhymed. Harmonious. John, how about you?
The earliest I can track my relatives back is 1654.
Unbelievable.
And I had relatives on both sides of the Civil War. And two great-great-grandfathers shooting each other.
Oh my, too good. So John said he can trace his family roots back to 1654. He had family that served on the Confederate side and the Union side, so they were shooting against like a lot of families shooting against one another. What are you gonna do? Wow, that's incredible. And did they come from Holland?
Most of my relatives were Scottish, some Irish, some English.
Okay, which is another reason why everyone should read Gone with the Wind. Katara, I mean, it's such a great book. Okay, go on. Sorry. Okay, thank you. Okay, so now I don't know where it works. Okay, so after the war, Americans like Kathy's family, you raised your hand, and Christy and John, Americans like your family were living through our Reconstruction and a tech boom. And the tech boom then was industrialization. Transportation, fueled by coal and steam, benefited from a new industry called tourism, providing new opportunities for access beyond our borders. So much like in 2022, when our cabin fever gave way to our insatiable gusto to travel, so too did post-war civil Americans finally look outward via newspapers, magazines, and books, and those who could afford it, thank you, we're in the right place, they would pack their bags, they'd leave their front porch, and they lined up to buy their tickets to travel. In fact, many famous authors from this time period, like Dickens, Warton, Thackeray, and Mary Shelley, wrote books about travel. And I don't know about you, but I have not read any of these books. I've never heard of them, and I doubt that John's ancestors or Christie's or Kathy's were running to that equivalent of the bookstore and snapping them off the shelves. But I do, and I can tell you, I know why. First of all, these books were written with a certain tone, lofty, romantic, aristocratic, sublime, emotional. Go ahead. Twain's Innocents Abroad was a book like no other. I want you to look at it this way. Travel books during the latter half of the 19th century were akin to dining at a 5-star restaurant. like the French Laundry. Innocents Abroad was more like stopping at a Buc-ee's or having lunch at Bono's. I love AI. So be very careful around me. 2 examples of this plain Bucky Bono talk would be as follows. While traveling in Paris and visiting the Louvre, Twain became suspicious of tourists pretending to understand art they clearly could not understand or enjoy. And he remarked, quote, "People stand and stare and talk learnedly of pictures they don't care anything about." After his whirlwind tour of, that was my Mark Twain impression, by the way, and for the next, thank you, for the next 30 minutes, you're going to have to just suffer like Cindy has for the past few weeks. Fast forward to his tour of Rome and Florence, and he takes a dig at Europe's over-commercialization in the 1860s. And he says, every stone is a relic. Maybe not with such Yiddish inflection, but you get the point. Although he did meet Shalom Aleichem, but that's another story. He wrote Fiddler on the Roof. Okay, another great feature is that Twain plays fast and loose with the facts. No other travel book narrator advises the reader that if they want accuracy, they need to go check another book. But this adds to his storytelling genius. And you and me, we've all read stories with unreliable narrators, and it makes for very good reading. And he knew this, but I digress.
Except on art.
I never found that other shoe. Okay, anyway, everyday talks and quips like this are all throughout the book. Adding to this book, it was relatable. I liked it, well, I loved his plain talk. Readers loved his plain talk because Twain connected Americans to foreign lands, peoples, customs, and that would have been enough, but there's more. There is something revolutionary happening beneath the surface of these 600 plus pages. That's because Innocents Abroad wasn't just an American reader's sentimental journey. It was an MRI of our national and deeply personal character. So Twain revealed that travel does not show us the world. It serves as a mirror, revealing who we are when we encounter it. And that's the secret sauce. No other travel book had the combo of straight shooting plain talk, while at the same time challenging our identity. Travel is an expression of who we are and how we choose to live and interact with each other amongst the greater world. According to the Saturday Evening Post, Mark Twain blended and spiced realism in his journalistic writing and literary works. He filled them with cynical humor and social satire. Now, although the adventures of Tom Sawyer and the adventures of Huck Finn are better known, it was this book, Innocents Abroad, that first brought Twain international fame. So staying true to our timeline today, because I know I'm under the clock, right? Okay. I will first give you a little background on Twain and then his inflated yet wise 2 cents on one of the world's most famous and sacred beloved paintings. Please don't listen to the peanut gallery to my right. From his experience, we can distill the best travel wisdom Innocents Abroad has to offer in the form of Twain's handy-dandy travel tips. And you can pack these in your mental carry-on to take on board for your next adventure. Cindy, darling dearest, pairing Homer with Twain was quite a challenge, wasn't it? Oh my God.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, it is. Okay. I never make things easy, and I admit that, but the hard work has paid off. Your description of Homer and how the Civil War impacted him as an artist, it provides a great comparison to Twain. Whereas Homer was covering the war for Harper's Weekly, what was our Twain up to? Well, kind of the opposite. In 1861, that is the start of the war, Twain joined the Confederate militia in Missouri, but only briefly, as in like 2 weeks. Later, he would write about the war, demystifying its glories through his satire, but for a moment, we need to kind of readjust our American history goggles. You see, when Twain embarks on writing The Innocents Abroad, he is a much younger version of Twain than the one we have in our historical minds. You know the image. It's the one where we have Twain and Albert Einstein looking like they are clients from the same barber. Mark Twain was born Samuel Clemens in 1835, like Cindy said, in a little town called Florida, Missouri. Most of his life he did spend in Hannibal, Missouri, which is kind of north of St. Louis, and he was ill quite often. When Twain's mother was in her 80s, he asked her about his early years of ill health, and he asked her if she worried, was she uneasy, and what did mother say? Yes, I was worried the whole time. And he said, afraid I wouldn't live? And she said, no, afraid you would. Early on, he worked as, wait, there's a picture of mother.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, it's okay. There she is. So you wonder where he gets his acerbic wit. I think that answers our question. Okay, next slide. Early on, he worked as a printer's apprentice in Hannibal. This is the youngest known picture of Twain. Notice he's holding his name in printer's blocks, kind of low. Down you can see it says Samuel. At 22, he left home to become a riverboat pilot. And in 1861, of course, the war breaks out, and it's too dangerous to be traveling with commercial cargo on the Mississippi. And so it's then he has a short stint as a Missouri Marion Ranger. But it wasn't only Twain that lasted only 2 weeks. The whole group disbanded when they heard that Union forces in Grant were, headed their way. So go ahead and change. Like many Americans, he and his brother headed west. After failing at his attempt at silver mining, Sam Clemens became a reporter. If all else fails, right, Susan, wouldn't pick up your pencil. The next year is 1863, and he adopts a pen name. He went through several, but he landed on Mark Twain. Does anyone know what Mark Twain means? Of course John does, because he's like the smartest person I know. John, do tell.
It's a nautical term for death, Mark Twain.
Correct.
So the lead over and tells you how deep the water is.
That's right. So it's a nautical term for depth, and Davey's shaking her head. She knows this too. So it's 2 fathoms or 12 feet deep, and that was the safe, and Lori knows too, it was the safe passages for steamboats to travel down the river, so you'd mark Twain. So that's how you know, and never the twain shall meet. So that's how we come up with Mark Twain. And believe it or not, he ends up living he's fired from that job as a reporter, by the way, which comes as zero surprise to any of us. He ends up living with a friend in a cabin in a booming gold rush mine town called aptly Jackass Hill. It is fitting that he struck his first fortune there, not in gold, but at a bar. Surprise, where he overheard a story about a jumping frog contest. We don't have time for the jumping frog details, you'll be happy to know. But at the age of 30, he writes a story and publishes his first successful book, The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Cavaliers County. And this is his first leap on his, I couldn't help it. I was so excited. Okay, moving on.
Do you have sympathy for me? Really?
Everyone should have sympathy for Cindy, trust me. Okay, we find Twain now, 1857, so we can get rid of the frog thing, and we have a scrappy journalist, a humorist, moderate success, not yet a household name. How Twain snagged a plum assignment of writing about a transatlantic crossing and a 5-month grand tour of Europe, and the Middle East and Northern Africa is a story of ingenuity, pluck, and audacity. There's something very all-American about it. See, Twain saw a golden opportunity when he read about the much-publicized, luxurious steamship Quaker City and its maiden voyage from New York and an expedition to the Old World and the Holy Land. So this is what he does. He approaches a newspaper in San Francisco, the California Alta, and he convinces them to appoint him the role of special traveling correspondent. He writes 2 articles a week. 2, okay? And in return, they pay for his passage at a cost of $1,550. 5 months. Today, if I did the math right, and we're like at a 50-50 chance, but that's 28 grand. 2 articles a week. Rumors circulated that A-listers were amongst the highfalutin passengers. Twain would be rubbing shoulders with famous people. Stories about traveling abroad in such high style aboard a new steamer would sell newspapers that Kathy and Christy and John's family would read. It was a good deal for the paper and the very ambitious Twain. So here we are. Twain has talked a newspaper into paying for him to go on an all-expenses-paid luxury vacation, transatlantic crossing for 5 months and write. Sign me up. Sweet job indeed. It gets better. Can you imagine? It gets better. So go ahead, click to the next guy, because that's Act 1. Now he's going to double dip. After the expedition is over, and he knows this the minute he walks onto this ship, after it's over, he's going to convince a newspaper publisher that these articles are going to be combined and edited for flow and would make for an excellent travel book. And here is the full title of that said book that launched Twain to first-class fame. This book would become the best-selling travel book for the next quarter of a century. This book, with the title I'm about to read to you, would be the best-selling book that Mark Twain would see during his lifetime of all the books he wrote. It would be this one. Now, are you ready? I gotta get a drink. Cheers. Innocents Abroad, fair enough. Or The New Pilgrim's Progress, because every book's entitled to one subtitle, but au contraire. So here we go. The Innocents Abroad, or The New Pilgrim's Progress, being some account of the steamship Quaker City pleasure excursions to Europe and the Holy Land, with descriptions of counties, nations, incidents, and adventures as they appeared to the author. This sold. And now, although the title is so long, it can't even fit on a front cover or a spine, it's a winner. This is proof that back in the 19th century, people had much better attention spans compared to our tick-tock tainted brains of these days. Nonetheless, its popularity was relatable, like I said, to the everyday reader, written in American vernacular. And even with a title like that, I'd say that's pure American chutzpah. So I've been as long-winded as the title. Surely, Cindy, you'd probably like to snap the whip and shut me up, so I'll hush, and you can share.
I'm not going to snap the whip at you, although it is tempting. No, I'm just kidding.
And why don't you share Homer's creative process, how it evolved and captured the American spirit after the war?
So after the war, Homer shifted his subject matter to scenes meant to evoke simpler times, such as the one you see on one of his most beloved works, Snap the Whip, from 1872, which was painted 4 years before the publication of Tom Sawyer. Could there be any more exuberant group of children within a dynamic setting in art history? Playing a lively game with friends, linking hands barefoot in a field of beautiful wildflowers and soft grass in front of a one-room schoolhouse, reeking of nostalgia. The critic Henri James, who you'll hear more from Stacey. What a curmudgeon. The critic Henri James called the children, quote, barefoot little urchins, saying they were almost barbarously simple, horribly ugly. He didn't think that Homer's work was intellectual enough. Well, the Met shares that Homer painted this scene to remind Americans of the need to reunite the country after the Civil War. The little red schoolhouse serves as a reminder of simpler times, the rural ways of life that were changing so fast as a result of industrialization and more people leaving the countryside to larger urban cities. At the ripe old age of 47, Homer moved full-time to Prouts Neck, Maine, an incredibly beautiful spot, but obviously not one you would want to spend the winter in. So as we turn our attention to the painting on the screen, the Gulf Stream was painted in 1899 in Maine after he had gone on one of his fishing expeditions to Nassau and to Florida for several months in January and February of 1898. So why the Gulf Stream and why a lonely black figure? Well, just in case you're on Jeopardy and you don't have to compete against that Jamie fellow, and you do not know this striking fact, let me explain what the Gulf Stream is. It is a strong ocean current, sometimes described as a river within the ocean that brings the warm water from the Gulf of Mexico into the Atlantic Ocean and connects the Americas with Europe and West Africa. And according to the Sojourner Truth African Heritage Museum, quote, it was essential to the slave trade as it was the final leg of what is called the triangular trade, a high-speed maritime conveyor belt that returned ships and profits from the Americas to Europe, end quote. By the way, the term the Gulf Stream was named by Benjamin Franklin, who had published the first map of the waterway. So before we analyze the painting itself, I'm going to show you some works that influenced Homer in his dynamic choice. And the first one is a watercolor called A Basket of Clams. And he painted this, a watercolor of these two young boys who have just encountered a dead shark on the beach when they were looking for clams in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And you can see their disgust is reflected in the way that they turn their heads upon encountering this dead shark that had washed on the shore. And then another is the Derelict, another watercolor he made on assignment in Cuba when he saw a dismasted wreck of a ship surrounded by preying sharks. Now notice again this theme of man versus nature that he returns to over and over. And there are a couple of other influences that we want to talk about. One is the painting by the famous early American painter John Singleton Copley called Watson and the Shark. And Copley's picture, Watson and a Shark, it is believed that Winslow Homer actually saw it in person once the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston opened. And it's based on a true story of a young man named Brooke Watson who was on a ship. He was a boy who served as a crewman on a ship going from the Americas to London, and that they docked in the Havana harbor in Cuba, and the kid just jumped in the harbor to swim, and all of a sudden, the next thing he knows, he's being attacked by a shark who took off part of his right leg. But don't feel too badly, because he endured and became the Lord Mayor of London many years later. So the story has a happy ending. But if
You should try running right now. Everything's up for grabs over there. It's a long story.
Oh gosh. If you don't know this about Stacey, she has an obsession with the British politics, but that's for another day. Okay, so if you've ever seen a shark in person, you'll notice that Mr. Copley had not. If you look carefully, his shark has the face of the shark is just kind of an abomination in the sense that he's given the shark odd nostrils, strange thick lips, and certainly odd-looking ears. So, but all that to say is that, of course, Winslow Homer had seen plenty of sharks, and you'll see that when we go back to the Gulf Stream. So the next painting that Winslow Homer had seen in person was Joseph Mallord William Turner, who was the great 19th century British landscape and seascape painter. And this is considered one of his best, his masterpieces. It's called The Slave Ship from 1840. And it's got this foreboding sky. There's supposed to be a typhoon coming in this image. And I don't know if you can see them very well from the slide, the quality of the slide, but they're chains in the water, they're drowned body parts of slaves, blood. And this particular painting also represents a true story that happened in 1781, where there was a massacre on a ship called the Zong. That's just such a perfect word for the ship, where there were about approximately 440 slaves on the ship, and they were in horrible conditions. There was overcrowding, there was not enough water, lack of water, and about 130 of them died on the ship. And slaves at that time in history were considered cargo, and insurance companies would reimburse the captain of the ship or the owner of the ship for loss of cargo, but not loss of human life if they were sick. So instead of taking care of the 630 or so slaves, they were thrown overboard. And it was done to appear as if they had died as a result of being lost to the elements rather than illness. It was all done for means. So he saw this, so Homer saw this painting and was terribly moved by it. Okay, the next one is an American painting by Thomas Cole, who was the founder of the Hudson River School of Painting in the 19th century. And he did a series of paintings called The Voyage of Life. And each painting journaled the Christian journey of the soul and the reflections of human mortality. So there was childhood, youth, manhood, and old age. And we're looking at manhood, the third one in the series, where a middle-aged man kneels in a boat that has no tiller. He has no way of controlling where this boat is headed. And if you look carefully, because it's a dark picture, you look carefully, he's headed down either a rapids or a waterfall, and of course with no control, so you kind of get what's going on here. He loses his helm, and he's kneeling in his boat praying for divine intervention. So you'll just have to go look up the old age to see what happens to him. But what united these pictures, the Voyage of Life, the slave ship, along with Homer's Prisoners from the Front, the Civil War picture that we looked at earlier, they were all in the collection of a New York patron, one of Homer's patrons, one of the founders of the Metropolitan Museum, and are you ready? His name was John Taylor Johnston. I couldn't resist saying John Taylor because we love John Taylor so much. So John Taylor, maybe you're related in another life to John Taylor Johnston. But anyhow, that's where Homer would have seen all
There's
these
something
paintings.
John Taylor is not telling us.
Stacey, let's hear about this 5-month trip. Who do you envision going through the Uffizi with?
Well, I'll tell you about
Mark Know Nothing Twain. Know nothing about Mark Twain.
I'll tell you about Innocents Abroad because it's quite a handful, as you can see. It's not as bad as when I one year assigned Atlas Shrugged as summer reading for my book club. Susan, do you remember that? But this was quite the hefty read. But Innocents Abroad is a compilation of all Twain's newspaper articles written over that 5 months and divided into 61 chapters with equally long chapter titles, just like the title of the book, covering 53 destinations, and only some are indicated on this map. Before he even takes his first step onto the galleyway, his storytelling shenanigans begin. He has a pre-trial interview. Yes, even back then TSA was a necessary evil for people like Twain. He had to be vetted to become a certified passenger. He describes this TSA committee as bowelless, And he confesses that he completely padded his character references with, quote, people of high standing who would least likely to know anything about me. But once on board, and you see he made it, he found great material in his fellow passengers that he estimated to be between 40, 70 years old, but most of them, quote, were rusty old bachelors, about 50, unquote. So I'm a little insulted by the age thing, but that's okay. He said their routine included dinners, dominoes, devotion, and slander. So I would have gotten along with them, I do believe. But I was surprised to learn about his piety on those on board. They had daily prayer meetings and hymn singing, probably to make up for the slander. There was no hot tubs bubbling with bacteria, no conga lines, no all-you-can-drink or midnight buffets. He even says the coffee on board was awful. He complains about coffee the entire book. There's a lot of subplots, and that's one of them. Although advertised as a grand Holy Land pleasure excursion, Twain wrote that more fitting description would have been a grand Holy Land funeral procession. But his stodginess never deterred Twain from enjoying an evening stogie and a stiff drink. We don't get to know any of the passengers at all, obviously, because Twain is the star. But he does find a merry band of humorous companions, very much like the Witty the Pooh theory of groups. Everyone has its sweet Pooh, the anxiety-ridden rabbit, wise owl, doomsday Eeyore. Think about your friend group, you know it's true. Twain's supporting cast includes comical characters, a jokester, a know-it-all, and legions of rogue tour guides. There are practical jokes throughout the book. Pictured here is one of their many quests for a good shave. I had no idea this was so important. Obviously it is, and they're always pulling pranks about that. Twain says this about his traveling companions, quote, "Wherever we went, we made a sensation. None of us had ever been anywhere before. Travel was a wild novelty. We conducted ourselves in accordance with the natural instincts that were in us. We always took care to make sure that it was understood we were Americans." Now, if you're thinking this isn't always the savviest way to travel when you go abroad, I suggest you gird your passport to your chest. He says, "The people in foreign countries are very, very ignorant. They look curiously at the costumes we had brought from the wilds of America. They observe that we talk loudly at the table sometimes. In Paris, they simply opened their eyes and they stared when we spoke at them in French. We never did succeed in getting those idiots to understand their own language." Now remember, these are people that are traveling in this way for the first time. Americans are reconstructing their proud new identity after the war. This ethos of manifest destiny knows no borders. And believe it or not, he had time to reflect before he actually wrote this, and he still wrote this way. But I think there's an understated level of sarcasm that's happening throughout this storytelling, which leads me to the adage I'm sure you all know, but this would be a basic Twain travel tip. When in Rome, just do it as the Romans do. So Cindy, I have a question for you. Who do you envision most likely to join Twain and his traveling companions aboard the, there they are in France. But here they are aboard the River
If you look
City.
carefully, Homer Simpson, definitely Homer Simpson.
So, we were saying, would Winslow Homer, who's obviously seated at the bar, be more likely to be on board, or Homer Simpson, which is in the middle of the dance floor? If you look closely, you'll see him, because we don't want to get a copy struck. But anyway, there you have it.
I didn't put that in there, by the way. I just want to go on record.
Yeah, this is the first time Cindy saw that, but that happens. Okay, so hello, my friend. Go right ahead. I'll get rid of it.
So what are we seeing here in the Gulf Stream? which, by the way, it was painted, as I said, in the last year of the 19th century, and he actually reworked it in 1906, which is the year that the Met bought the picture. So this is in the collection of the Metropolitan. Well, and what do we see? We see a boat that's tilted upward amidst roiling waters strong enough to have dismantled the boat, and you can see there's no rudder, there's no functioning sail, there's no mast, and it's causing it to be adrift. And notice how many different types of waves and foam we see. I mean, Homer certainly studied water very carefully up in his main studio. It's all so perilous here. We see plenty of red blood dotting the ferocious ocean, and of course, the sharks. So can we get a close-up of the sailor? Our eyes observe a completely helpless, reclining black man whose pose seems rather relaxed. His right hand is holding onto a line of sugar cane. From that, we can infer that he worked in the sugar cane fields, and his left hand holds a short rope tied to the inside of a metal ring. It is clear that he has lost all control of his craft. Looking out in an opposite direction of the tilt of the boat, the well-muscled figure described similarly as a fallen gladiator, because look at how developed his muscular upper body is. He has a stoic expression on his face, a resigned look, as if, he knows what's coming, and he's seemingly oblivious of the school of frenzied sharks that are encircling the tossing boat. It's kind of like, one of those boats, if you ever bathed a toddler in the boat in the bathtub going back and forth. On the museum label, which we have a slide of it, you don't need to go to that. Yeah, but there's a quote referencing Nobel Prize-winning poet Derek Walcott, who wrote about the painting, where he thought the figure was looking towards what was Africa, but you don't think that's accurate?
I think he's looking forward, looking north, looking to the future. But
that's hopeful. I think we need to be hopeful here. For one thing, Homer never saw such a scene as the one we're looking at. Instead, he'd seen, as I showed you, he saw sharks, he'd seen rough waters, he'd seen water spouts, he'd seen boats in distress, but never all at the same time. So this is the first time he's putting all these elements together. And this particular work has been analyzed through multiple lenses. The obvious one is man versus nature theme. Homer eloquently describes the black sailor's struggle as he awaits his fate. Will he be struck by the water spout that's on the right-hand side of the painting and tossed into the cruel black shark-filled sea? Or will he be rescued by the three-masted schooner on the other side of the ominous water spout? The Met analyzed that the unknown sailor/slave could also be analyzed as a symbol of African-American experience, the African-American experience after Reconstruction, having to deal with a hateful world and the continuance of slavery and the system it perpetuated. According to a cultural critic named Mark Twain, quote, "Sugar cane, as seen inside the boat, is a reference to the exploitative industry built on slave labor." He posits that, quote, "the Gulf Stream has been essential to the traffic of human beings, accelerating the transport of slaves across the Atlantic." Presenting the black figure with the sugar cane inside the boat links the struggle to survive the horrific history of slavery to the economic commodity represented by the sugar cane, end quote. The Gulf Stream could also be viewed through a more personal lens for Homer, as it was painted 1 year after he lost his father, and that the sailor's vulnerability is often seen as a reflection of the artist's feelings of mortality and abandonment. Critics were quick to judge. Aren't they always quick to judge?
Yes, they are.
Initial response to the work provoked all kinds of outrage, from calling it smiling sharks to repulsive to grim, to people being very upset about the man's fate. We learned that Homer told his dealer, quote, "You ask me for a full description of my picture of the Gulf Stream? I regret very much I have painted a picture that requires any description. I have crossed the Gulf Stream 10 times, and I should know something about it. The boat and the sharks are outside matters of very little consequence. They have been blown out to sea by a hurricane. You tell these ladies, and apparently a lot of ladies complained, you tell these ladies that the unfortunate Negro will be rescued and returned to his friends and home, and ever after live happily. He was just furious. 7 years after it was exhibited, Homer added the ship on the horizon to address the public outcry about the young man's outcome, including a hopeful sign that perhaps the young man endured instead of being a tragic figure. According to the Met, again, Homer added the useless sail, increased the waterspout, and added the name Anna and Key West on the little sign on the stern of the boat after he first exhibited it. Why is this such an important image? In addition to the multiple lenses of interpretation, the subject remains relevant to today's conversations about our national original sin, aka slavery. Homer's humanitarian voice alluded to the vestiges of slavery and America's role in imperialism. It is a conversation starter that we need to address and be more aware. Analyzing it is a first step. And it also, to me, demonstrates the power of art to ignite interest and communicate awareness. Stacey, my dear, you know this is my favorite part of the conversation. Tell us about Mark Twain's strange and rather ignorant notions on art. Or specifically, Leonardo's Last Supper. Get ready, buckle up.
The innocence abroad overfloweth with Twain's observations about art, historical sites, and religious landmarks. It was hard for me to choose which one. So today I figure we can take a quick virtual flight to Milan all together aboard LitART Airways, which has not been impacted by the price of fuel. And we can listen to Twain's oration about the Last Supper. The picture of the Last Supper is painted on the dilapidated walls of what was once a little chapel. It is battered and scarred in every direction and staining and discolored by time. Napoleon's horses had kicked the legs off most of his disciples when they, the horses, not the disciples, were stabled there more than half a century ago. I recognize that old picture in a moment. The picture, from which all engravings and copies have been made for 3 centuries, was lovely. Perhaps no living man has ever known an attempt to paint the Lord's Supper differently. The world seems to have become settled in the belief that long ago it was not possible for human genius to outdo this creation of Da Vinci's. I suppose painters will go on copying it as long as any of the originals left to the invisible eye. There were a dozen easels in the room and many artists transferring the great pictures onto canvases. I could not help noticing how superior these copies were from the original, to my inexperienced eye. Wherever you find a Raphael, a Rubens, a Michelangelo, a Carracci, or a Da Vinci, and we see them all the time, you find artists copying them, and the copies are always the handsomest. Maybe the originals were handsome when they were new, but they're certainly not now. And people come here from all over, and they glorify this masterpiece. They stand a trance, bated breath, parted lips, and when they speak, it is only in catchy ejaculations of rapture. Oh, wonderful! Such grace and dignity! I envy these people. Envy them and their honest admiration, if it be honest, their delight if they feel delight. But at the same time, how can they see what's not there? That was what I thought when I stood before the Last Supper. After reading so much about it, I'm satisfied that it was a very miracle of art. Once. It's fair to say he wouldn't be welcome here as a JU professor. Would that be a fair statement?
No, that would be a no.
Well, all I have to say is someone needs to get this man a juice box, because maybe Twain was exhausted. Maybe he needed an espresso. Imagine you're traveling for 20 weeks straight, visiting museums, landmarks, churches, historical and religious sites all over Europe, North Africa, etc. No AC. Anyway, the motif of travel exhaustion is repeated throughout this book, and most notable quotes include, "We have seen enough of this art to last a lifetime." And if you see one ruin, you've seen them all. His whirlwind trip through Italy's art treasures draws this quip about the great Michelangelo. He says, "I'm glad that he's dead. He could not have done any more to deserve it." His overload in 1867 is akin to our overload in today's fast-paced cultural world. So just remember this Twain travel tip, that overexposure can destroy appreciation. Your itinerary reflects your purpose. Is it a race or an experience? So pace yourself. Now, I must share the most shocking episode of Innocents Abroad, and it relates to the Good Morning America piece that Kathy told me about a few weeks ago, and it addressed the damage done by mass tourism. The crowds choking Venice, Athens, Barcelona. Twain would have told Good Morning America that he had that scoop well over a century ago. So I want you to picture this. Our special correspondent is squinting in the blazing sun, gazing up at one of the world's greatest wonders. But wait, what's that sound? Could it be, quote, people chiseling their names upon the Sphinx? And he says they will do it, though they have to climb over 1,000 years of history in order to accomplish it. That's the paradox of travel then and now. Hence the travel trip. A tip, don't treat historical sites like souvenir shops. So there's something more I love that chapter by chapter is revealed through this book, and that is this emerging theme of self-awareness. The further he travels from home, the better he understands himself. His reflections about human nature are timeless. So as you trap the summer and gaze out your window at 40,000 feet, consider this. Here's a Twain travel tip for you. The gentle reader will never know what a consummate ass he can become until he goes abroad. So Cindy, Twain, Homer, they capture our past. Will you please tell us about artists that capture America's future ahead?
So we're going to wrap it up here with shining a spotlight on some influencers this season. You're looking at an impressive one, Carrie James Marshall, born in 1955 in Birmingham, Alabama, and he's one of the most important living American artists. And actually, as a true confession, I usually don't admit this, but he's one of my favorite artists. In a video interview, he said that he knew he wanted to be an artist when he was in kindergarten. That's pretty self-aware. His teacher showed him a scrapbook as a treat for good behavior, a scrapbook of images of magazines and other sources. And so Stacey and I actually saw a major retrospective of his London show this past January at the Royal Academy in London. And you can't get much more elevated than the Royal Academy. Marshall, if you recall, is an artist who is well known for adding black figures in Western art history's timeline, which would have included old masters, because they had been left out. And that's been one of his major aims in his art. So we're looking at Marshall's version of what he calls the Gulf Stream after Homer. So what's the first thing that comes to mind when you see this work? Peaceful. Family. There are no sharks. There's no blood. There's blacks are at leisure. There's even a boombox on the boat here. It's joyful, it's liberating, and there's even a gold rope around that's painted around the work itself, lending a kind of a nautical feel to it. And if we go to both, and it's a fairly large picture. So this is a slide of these two images side by side. There's over 100 years between them that separate them. And what can we interpret here? That there's a shift from black trauma to black joy. The Royal Academy interpreted this scene to refer to this a peaceful, profound design meant to normalize a peaceful world for black people, and normalcy and optimism. And so the similarities include that the boats are both diagonally placed, they're both in the Gulf Stream, they both have a racial focus on black identity, and they both have distant boats in the background with dark clouds looming. But the differences are that the lone figure is, he's really more in a serious, obviously terrible spot where the family or friends are relaxing and they're enjoying this beautiful day out of doors. And so, and certainly it goes on, the tone of the Homer is bleak, it's dramatic and suspenseful, whereas the Kerry James Marshall is hopeful and celebratory and leisurely. But regarding the framing, the Winslow Homer has a traditional standard museum frame, but Kerry James Marshall's glittery rope, you notice that the rope is broken on one side, which transforms this painting into a symbol of bondage, from a symbol of bondage into a symbol of freedom. And there's a very well-known art gallery in New York called Jack Shaman, who luckily enough met Kerry James Marshall many years ago and represents him. And he says that Marshall uses craft store glitter as a deliberate stand-in for the gold leaf or gilding that is found in medieval or Renaissance religious icons, and that he uses the glitter to sanctify his black subjects and elevate the scene to monumental iconic status. And Marshall says this about the glitter. He says, and I saw this on a video on the YouTube, he says, glitter is the magic on top of the ordinary. He is just the most unassuming, self-deprecating person, Kerry James Marshall. So if you ever have a chance to look him up, I think you'll find that to be true. So the genius that is Kerry James Marshall's work is that he's deliberately reversed Homer's imminent disaster, and he's created this work that envisions black life within art history. And how does he manage that? Well, he takes away all the drama and replaces it with happiness. And that just speaks volumes about him. And I was going to show you one more, but I'm just going to show you another contemporary artist named Beau Bartlett, an artist who lives on an island in Maine. And he makes these huge paintings. He's from Columbus, Georgia, which is where Dolores and Wayne Weaver are from, as well as Amy Sherald, who painted Michelle Obama's painting. And Bartlett is the same age as Marshall, and he also interpreted Homer's Gulf Stream with a shark motif. But he actually, not only does he use the Gulf Stream, he was sitting in a diner in Maine, and he saw this painting, Homer's Fog Warning, where the man in the boat is not beset by sharks, but he's beset by the fog, and fog in Maine can be really dramatic. And so Bartlett's painting is called Lifeboat, and you can see here that you've got a well-dressed young man he's out in the water in a very sunny day. So, what's going on here with this wave? And actually the waves don't look nearly as dramatic as our Homer waves, as you can see in the fog warning on the right. We don't have a picture of all three of them, do we? But go to the next one. So you can see how the shark, though, does play into this painting. The super talented Lisa DeLuma, who works with Searching for Identity, because if you look at it, you can see that I read where he says that the head of the figure is supposed to be the eye of the shark, and then you can go from there. Go back a second and see if you. Isn't that fascinating?
Oh my God.
Yeah, and so one of the things that Bartlett says about himself is that he was having a midlife crisis when he painted this work. So you can kind of tell why this figure is in the belly of the shark, and he named his boat Jonah, and he says that the figure is in the belly of the beast. But hopefully, and certainly he recovered from his midlife crisis, hopefully this figure will too. Well, I did advertise 20th century artists who revered Homer. I don't want to be known as a false advertiser, so we're going to just flip through those really quickly. And You've got one up, George Bellows, who with Robert Henri were part of the Ashcan School. Edward Hopper, whose sense of isolation was similar in terms of the figure to Homer. And then the person, the artist, Maine artist and Pennsylvania artist, Andrew Wyeth, who's really been called the most direct heir to Homer, and who also has a home on an island in Maine. Paints these incredibly nostalgic, these images of isolation, and sometimes we call these Wyeth's implied self-portraits, because this one in particular is set at the farmhouse of Christina and Alvaro Olson, who were, Christina was the subject of his very famous work, Christina's World. So all of these artists are inheritors of Homer's incredible legacy, which speaks to his broad reach, his elevation of nature, his authenticity. If you ever get a chance to see his watercolors, run, don't walk to see them. Their mastery is worth your attention. And Homer, as you can see, was a masterful painter, and he interpreted the American vision after the Civil War, creating works of hope and joy in children and play, but also the extraordinary power of nature and its consequences. So I hope that we both have built a case for excellence, as our true American stars have revealed. And certainly Homer took his mindset and experiences and transformed them into this unforgettable body of work. All right, Stacey.
So if you, like me, have on your bucket list going to Hartford, Connecticut to visit Twain's home, then I would say Innocents Abroad is for you. Otherwise, just taking a look at Innocents Abroad via LitART will work for you just fine. In a moment, Cindy and I will turn the floor over to John Taylor. But until then, we want you to know, from the bottom of our hearts, we have been humbled and honored to have you with us on this wild ride about artists and authors who this season have broken the mold. And when you leave here today, we hope you, like Cindy and me, feel inspired and connected to one another through your love of art and literature. Wherever your travels may lead, I'd like you to consider Twain's most famous quote for your final Twain travel tip, and that is this: "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts." And I would say now more than ever before, it has been a pleasure to work with you, Cindy. This woman deserves a medal for putting up with me. And many of you probably know that.
We love each other. We do.
We certainly do. We will be back in the fall, so watch your inbox for next season's reveal and registration. On behalf of our Searching for Identity board, if you could raise your hand, we have a few board members with us here today. Thank you so much. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Our team and our amazing volunteers who we thank, please join together, and we can wish our beloved Ruth Cohen a very happy 93rd birthday. Congratulations, Ruth. Mwah. Thank you so much, and we'll now turn the floor over to John Taylor.